In this video, I will provide a description for the modified finger spring along with the procedure for fabrication of this spring. First, we will start with the indication. The modified finger spring is mainly indicated for the extrusion of ectopic or hypocally erupting maxillary canine or central incisor. So if we imagine that the right maxillary central incisor is highly positioned as I drew it on the cast, is highly positioned in the labial vestibule. So we can use the modified finger spring to extrude this tooth, but there should be an attachment, mainly a hook. A hook is bonded to the tooth intended to be moved, so the patient will be able to engage the active arm of the modified finger spring into the hook to obtain the desired action or movement. Description of the modified finger spring. It's constructed mainly from 0.5 and sometimes from 0.6 millimeter stainless steel wire. It consists of an active arm. This is the active arm. The active arm extends from the mesial aspect of the tooth intended to be moved, if the tooth is here located, the highly positioned tooth, from the mesial aspect and passes distally across two adjacent teeth. So it will pass across the upper lateral and upper canine in this case, if we intend to move the highly positioned central incisor, if we imagine that it is located here. The active arm should be located about 3 millimeters away from the gingival margin of the teeth, the central, the lateral, and canine. Then at the distal aspect of the canine, there will be a helix. The helix is located above the active arm, and the position of the helix is opposite to the direction of the intended movement. So if we need to extrude the tooth, so the force is directed occlusally, then the coil will be directed in a vestibular direction. So the position of the coil is opposite to the direction of intended tooth movement. The internal diameter is about 3 millimeter or 4 millimeter for external diameter. The active arm should have a loop at its end to prevent trauma to the adjacent soft tissues. It's important that the bend will not cross the midline. So if we draw the midline between the two maxillary central incisors, the loop should not cross the midline or irritate the labial frenum. Also, the active arm should be well adapted or contoured to the alveolar bone, leaving about 0.5 to 1 millimeter space. The wire will not make a complete turn at the helix. It will leave the helix at right angle to the active arm. This is a right angle, moving in occlusal direction into the embrasure between upper canine and upper first premolar. Then it will passes on the palatal aspect. It should be well adapted on the palatal side and palatal embrasure. Then at 2 millimeters, 1 or 2 millimeter distance from gingival margin on the palatal aspect, start to make your acute bends to form the retentive tag that will be embedded into the acrylic base plate and provide retention for the spring. The active arm need to be bent in a vestibular direction, about 10-degree bend. You should make about 10-degree bend of the loop or the end of the active arm. The bend start at the distal aspect or distal margin of the tooth intended to be moved. This will ensure adequate or a proper application of the force needed to extrude the tooth. Modified finger spring is activated by opening the coil and moving the active arm 3 millimeter in occlusal direction. By opening the coil and moving the active arm about 3 millimeter in occlusal direction, I will start by straightening 6 or 7 to 8 millimeter of 0.5 millimeter stainless steel wire. I will make a small loop at the very end of the wire. Then I will squeeze it between the two beaks at the base of the plier. To make it as small as possible. Now I need to adapt it along the alveolar surface of the teeth by making small short round bends. Making small short round bends along the active arm. Then I need to check it on the cast. I need to correct the vertical orientation by holding the wire with the loop parallel to the floor, then making this backward bend. As you can see, now it is adapted to the alveolar bone. Now I need to make the mark for the position of the coil. I will hold the end at its correct position. Then I will make a mark at the distal end of the canine. Exactly. This is the position of the mark. Now I hold the plier slightly below or beyond the mark, just a little bit. Then start making the coil. It's important that the coil passes, or the wire passes above the active arm. And the turn will not be completed, the turn of the coil. It will leave the coil, the wire will leave the coil at right angle to the active arm, as you can see. Now I need to check it again on the cast to make sure it's in the correct position. As you can see. Now I need to adapt this part. The wire at the area where it leaves the coil need to be adapted until the occlusal plane.
So this can be achieved by holding the wire from the coil and making slide downward bends. Then you need to check it. Needs more adjustment. Now it is well adapted, as you can see. I need to put a mark where the wire will cross the cloisal surface. So, as you can see, the wire is interfering, or there's interference with the palatal cusp of the upper first premolar. So I need to move the wire slightly mesially. So this is done by holding the wire at the bend, then moving the wire in an anterior direction, or bending the wire in anterior direction to get rid of this interference. Now I need to increase the bend toward the palatal surface. I will grab the wire just slightly beyond the bend, the first bend, and then increase the bend toward the palatal surface. I need to reduce it a little bit. Now I will cut this excess piece. After cutting the excess wire, as you can see, now I will start to make the zigzag bend about 2 millimeters away from the gingival margin. Then I will complete the adaptation on the palatal surface. It's important to hold the wire in the correct orientation according to the mark, and start your zigzag bend as usual. Always make sure you are holding the wire in correct plane. Correct plane. So I will cut the excess wire. I will complete the adjustment. As you can see, I need to reduce the space between the retentive tag and the pellet. Now it is acceptable. To finish the modified finger spring, a small bend needs to be made at the distal end of the tooth to be extruded or moved occlusally. So I will put a mark at the distal end of the tooth. From this mark, I will make a very small bend, about 10 degree bend apically, in apical direction. So it's a very small bend. This will ensure the correct application of the intended force. So this will be made at the very end of the fabrication of the modified finger spring. At the end, you should check the following. The loop of the active arm should not cross the midline or irritate the labial frenum. The active arm should be well contoured to the alveolar process, about 2 to 3 mm away from the gingival margin of the teeth. The coil should be made above the active arm, and the wire leaves the coil at right angle to the active arm to pass between the canine and upper first premolar. Now, on the palatal surface or from the occlusal surface, you should check the following. There should be no interference with the on the occlusal surface with the opposing arch, and the retentive arm should be contoured to the palatal surface, leaving only a small space about 0.5 to 1 mm between the retentive tag and the surface of the cast to allow space or room for the acrylic base plate material.